Originally known as the Kindly Estate or Sanctuary, today the place bears only one frightful name: the Estate of Unrest. In today's lore video, we will be covering the Estate of Unrest. We will be talking about the origins of how it came to be, and what took place to result in how it is today. I hope you enjoy. Where the Kindly Estate eventually came to stand, there was once nothing but sea. At that time, the pool that would later be known as Dagnar's Cauldron was vaguely triangular in shape, with the base of the triangle not closed off but open to the sea. In time, due to the actions of the dwarves, the mountains beside the pool were brought tumbling down so that a new strip of land stretched across the bottom end of the pool, dividing it from the ocean to the southwest and setting it into the rough teardrop shape it still bears today. For many decades, this new piece of land lay untouched. The dwarves had retreated back to their mountain fastness and wanted no part of the area they had devastated so badly. And the Kedge were no more, their last survivor hidden deep within his landlocked keep. Gradually, though, creatures began to travel along the southwest edge of the pool. Because of the violence with which the land had been created, soil and rock had been churned about, and surprisingly, the area proved fertile. Within a few years, it was teeming with all manner of plants, including fruits and grains. And the nearby gnolls and orcs saw this and decided to claim it. They fought over the land, each tribe warring for dominance. Then a man came from beyond the waters, a priest of Quellius, called Eirnosh. The man wished to spread the peace of his goddess, and when he saw the turmoil here, he decided that this was the place where he could make a difference. He settled the land and began to build a temple. At first, the local humanoid tribes laughed at the newcomer, but largely ignored him, being too busy fighting their pitched battles against one another. Then, as they saw the walls of his compound go up, they became more concerned. They began to threaten him, sure that no mere man would dare stand against them. Yet Eirnosh was no ordinary man. He was incontestable in his faith, and gentle Quellius smiled upon him, keeping him from harm. After the temple was finished, creatures began to approach, hesitantly at first, often secretly, but then in greater numbers. Soon orcs and gnolls and others were knocking openly on the door and asking to be admitted. The priest welcomed all, and tutored them on how to work together. Though he was unable to establish a lasting trust between the gnolls and the orcs, Eirnosh did keep the area around his temple calm and peaceful, and he did manage to bring some of the warlike folk to the view that not everything can be solved with hatred and fear. A rare and remarkable accomplishment indeed. After Eirnosh finally died of old age, his temple was left alone by the humanoid tribes out of respect, until eventually the wooden structure crumbled away of its own accord, and its rotted remains nurtured the plants all around it. Several centuries after Eirnosh's death, another priest of Quellius arrived on Faydwer's southern shore. This man, a noble named Frederick Wilhaven, brought his entire family with him. He came in search of the shrine of Eirnosh, whose legend had reached other temples in other lands, and after many months of searching, Wilhaven finally located the ruins of his predecessor's holy place. Looking around at the lush grounds, Wilhaven admired his predecessor's choice and dedication, and dedicated himself at once to following in Eirnosh's footsteps. Like Eirnosh, he hoped to teach the local races how to live together without war or strife, but a temple alone would not be enough. Instead, Wilhaven paced out a large estate, and at its center, he constructed an impressive manor house, his family chapel sitting directly upon the foundations of Eirnosh's fallen shrine. This estate, like its precursor, was open to any in need, and was protected from harm by a mighty talisman Eirnosh had crafted, which Wilhaven called the Hearthstone of Gentle Dissuasion. In time, many sought out the estate for shelter or healing, and all manner of creatures lived together there in peace. But not everyone admired Wilhaven's actions or good faith. Some wished to see him destroyed and all his good works undone. Chief among these enemies was the mighty Lich Tintragan, who desired the estate for himself and preferred chaos and bloodshed to peace and tranquility. More than once he pitted his might against Willhaven, but each time the gentle power of Quellius, not to mention the estate's new residents, came to the holy man's aid. Tintragen was unable to enter the estate himself, for the Hearthstone blocked any whose heart harbored ill will toward the master of the estate and his charges. Then Tintragen hit upon a plan. He waylaid a lone traveler, an itinerant dwarf named Garanel. The foul lich possessed the dwarf, displacing his spirit and taking up residence in the small but fierce warrior's fame. Then he approached Willhaven's estate, pleading for aid. The cleric's followers took the wounded dwarf in, and the Hearthstone let him pass, for indeed, within Garanel's heart, there was no malice towards any of the estate. The evil spirit controlling the dwarf's body had other plans. Once inside, Tintragen waited until nightfall, then leaving his cot in the infirmary, he crept, in the dwarven body, into the family's quarters. The Willhaven family slept secure in the belief that no harm could befall them on their sanctified ground. The lich slaughtered every last one of them. On their bodies he performed foul rituals, atrocities, dragging their heads into the family's chapel and staining the walls with their blood. The chapel and the manors were desecrated, and with the cleric's death, the Hearthstone's words fell as well, opening the way for Tintragen's followers to enter. Willhaven had been a pious gentleman and devout follower of Quellius, and the goddess was outraged by the act of defilement. Looking down and seeing the carnage, she drove back the foul creatures invading the estate, but in her anguish, she did not read the signs properly. Seeing only a murderous dwarf at the root of the slaughter, she smote the poor creature at once. Moreover, she decreed that his mere death was insufficient to atone for such a crime. The murderer of her favored priest would be bound to the estate for all time, unable to depart the property, unable to rest. Since the grounds were already profane, she withdrew her divine protection from the land, and it became unwholesome that only the vilest of creatures, or those who already beyond death, would ever choose to reside there. When Garanel's body died, his soul was consigned to lifeless existence as a ghost. Tintragen at the time was trapped within the dwarf's walking corpse, his power dramatically reduced. However, the lich knew that once he returned to his own form, he would regain his full powers. He was already undead, so the goddess's blow had done little to hinder him. And then, when fully restored with the cleric out of his way, Tintragen could sweep across all Faydwer if he wished, conquering the entire continent, but he failed to reckon on the legendary anger of the dwarves. Garanel had not been a good man, necessarily, but neither was he evil, and he was a lawful soul at heart. The acts Tintragen had committed with his body sickened the dwarves, but worse, the goddess' punishment struck him as unfair. The lich was wholly to blame for the catastrophe, and should be the only one doomed for it. The dwarf's spirit raged with righteous indignation in its confinement. Garanel was now a ghost, without a physical form of his own, who was unable to reclaim his body as long as the lich occupied it, yet he could still influence others. Dominating several of the lich's more weak-willed servants, Garanel took the first steps towards his own terrible revenge. When Tintragen returned to his base to re-enter his own body, he found, to his great dismay, that it was no longer there. Since that time, Ghost and Lich have waged ceaseless war upon one another. Tintragen wishes to find and reclaim his own form, and with his full powers. Garanel wants only to cause the Lich to suffer as greatly as he had suffered, impunged and wronged as he has been. Taking back his own body would be ideal. Either way, the Ghost Dwarf hopes to prove to Quellius that he was an unwilling pawn in the Willhaven murders, and should thus be allowed to move on to the afterlife. Both sides in this ongoing battle have gathered various forces, and the undead on the estate are divided amongst almost evenly between the two camps. Ghost and Lich also seek new recruits for their armies, which they draw from among those foolish enough to enter the place and be slain. For such victims are then reanimated by the dark curse of the estate. And of course, both still search for the Hearthstone, which would most likely give the possessor a decided advantage. The only intelligent living creatures who reside on the estate for any length of time are a cabal of gnome necromancers from the dark reflection. For those spellcasters, the estate is a beautiful place filled with creatures they can raise and control as they wish. Currently, only one gnome named Krix Fritchoff lives here. He and his allies are not the worst interlopers who have dwelt here, though. Another necromancer, a dark elf only known as the Grim, visited the estate several decades ago, seeing the evil loose upon the grounds and sensing the fear its inhabitants might spread. The Grim felt this was a perfect place to dedicate to his own master, for he was no worshipper of Inaruk, but a convert to Khazak-Thul, god of fear. As part of his ritual, the Tyr Dal dug up all the bodies in the graveyard, except for that of the estate's original priest, Eirnosh, which the Grim was unable to touch, and reanimated them as zombies. Then the Grim sacrificed himself in the chapel, desecrating it a second time, but also consecrating it to his Dark Lord. Khazak-Thul was surprisingly pleased with this act, and delighted also by the not entirely just curse Quellius had already placed here. So he added his own power to her edict, increasing its strength, so that now the estate not only transforms any who die there into undead, but actually draws other evil and undead creatures towards it. Slowly but surely, the estate's influence is creeping out into the lands beyond, and if it is not stopped, it could eventually draw every undead creature on the continent to its clutches. Though Quellius has recently become aware of Khazak-Thul's actions with respect to the Willhaven estate, she is still angry about what occurred in the chapel. The moods of deities are notoriously lengthy, and have not bothered to review the events that transpired here just a few generations ago, nor to block the actions of the faceless. Geography. All around the estate of Unrest, the land is rocky, for it was formed from the crashing descent of the surrounding mountains. When Brel's avalanche sealed off the great pool nearby, tons of stone filled the gap. A great mass of dirt was also churned up by the landslide. But it happens that, of all the peninsula, the location upon which the estate rests is the only area that received enough soil for trees and plants to grow in abundance. The ground here has not changed in the intervening years. If anything, it has become richer from tilling over the decades during which workers from the Kindly estate and the subsequent Willhaven estate farmed the surrounding land. The estate faces north, and in that direction as well as along its sides, it is surrounded by tall cliffs. These form natural walls higher than any man could build, and the estate workers simply smooth the cliffs along the interior to form a more even surface. The rear of the estate, lying closest to the sea, slopes downward slightly, and this area has no towering rock. However, over time, the workers quarried stone from the other side and built a tall wall here, fully 20 feet high and 6 feet thick. Within its 4 walls, 3 natural and 1 constructed, the estate resembles a rectangle with faceted corners, being wider than it is tall. The ground is roughly level, and some armed with a shovel could easily dig down 10 feet or more before hitting any stone. Long ago, the priest Eirnosh brought some order to the area, trimming back the wild trees and planting new saplings in orderly groves. After his death, the plants grew wild again, so that by the time the Willhavens arrived, the area resembled a jungle with its thick foliage and hanging vines. They once again uprooted everything and smoothed the grounds, replanting from scratch and creating neat gardens. The only part they did not tear up was the thicket toward the south, which they cut paths into, transforming into a proper hedge maze. The estate currently does not have any visible streams or rivers, but it does possess 2 pools, a fountain, and even a small waterfall. These are all fed by underground streams from the mountains around them, and they are freshwater bodies rather than salt water of the nearby Cauldron or the ocean. Climate. Before its desecration, the estate was pleasantly cool, with that crisp tang to the air that comes from proximity to the ocean. Breezes often waft over the land, and though the air was filled with moisture, the cooler temperature kept the humidity from being unpleasant. Sunlight beat down upon the foliage, and trees provided welcomed shade. All that changed after the Willhavens died. Part of Quellius's curse was to shroud the estate in fog and clouds, so that today no sunlight ever reaches the ground. The temperature turned from pleasantly cool to uncomfortably chill. and the salt tang was replaced by a rank, sickly sweet smell of rotting flesh. Visibility is low even to those with infravision, and the fog often plays tricks upon the eyes. The moisture also seemed to increase, clothing is always damp, skin always clammy, and metal always on the verge of rusting. The wind no longer touches this land, and instead it seems as still as a tomb, the air heavy and stale, yet sounds travel well, often amplified or echoed by the fog, and the estate is never silent, for somewhere on its grounds one or more of the tormented dead are always howling their anguish. Khazad-Thul immediately admired the place's atmosphere, and added only a single touch of his own. He allowed sunlight to pierce the clouds and fog, but only to a random patch. Far from illuminating the grounds, it's merely created shifting shadows where before it was only pitch darkness. The shadows seem to move on their own with no fixed relationship to the position of the light, and this makes it hard to gauge distance, direction, or size. These beams of sunlight also add an unsettling luminescence to the fog, and its almost animate tendrils seem to glow as they drift across the ground. Many of the estate's trees died from the lack of the sun, but vines and weeds have flourished, as have all manner of mushrooms and fungi. A few hardy trees have survived and have grown wan and sickly, while those that fell simply provided more nutrients for the twisted and ungainly plants that took their place. Much of the estate is a triangle now, and roots and vines always catch at clothes, feet, elbows, and weapons alike. The unwary often find themselves sprawling, and even careful travelers might trip every few minutes, unable to see the plants and roots blocking their way in the foggy gloom. Entrances. The only obvious entrance to the estate is from the south. Among the cliffs that surround Dagnar's Cauldron is a narrow passageway, a winding gorge of sorts that winds its way between two upthrust slabs of rock that eventually leads directly into the hollow occupied by the estate. To the sides of this passage, the rock rears up more than 100 feet in most places and is a collection of jagged spires rather than flat, smooth plains. Few could enter over the top of the rocks, at least not without magical aid or a pair of wings. Here at the end of the passage, a 20-foot high wall with a heavy wooden gate rises. It is possible to climb this wall, though it's slippery with rotting vines and fungus. A second entrance does exist, however. Along the east side of the estate, a small waterfall where the water drips down from several pools in the rock. Below this waterfall is a grotto, whose water empties out through a natural channel and flows further south along a tortuous route to the ocean. A small creature such as a halfling or gnome could fit through this passage, though he would have to be careful. The water moves swiftly down this pipe, and it would be almost impossible to get additional air along the way. Several underground streams out of the mountains feed the pools and the fountains along the estate's front entrance. No one has ever found the source of these streams, but if a traveler could locate them, it might conceivably be possible to swim along the stream and emerge in one of these basins. There is no guarantee, however, that the streams are wide enough to accommodate a traveler, nor that a swimmer would find any air before surfacing in the pools. Defenses. Considering that this is a place built to promulgate peace and harmony, the estate is impressively well defended. The cliffs on three sides would deter any but the bravest, or most foolish, of climbers. The only entrance is reached through a narrow corridor, too tight and too twisted for more than a handful to pass through at a time. After the last turn, the corridor widens, so guards placed within the estate would have a clear shot at any approaching, and intruders would have little time to regroup before being struck down by arrows. Finally, the wall to the south is high and thick and too slick to be climbed easily. Beyond its natural defenses and the one wall, the estate has no defense. It was intended as a sanctuary for any who approach with good intent, so guards were never posted around the grounds. The Hearthstone made more mundane defenses largely unnecessary, for it magically blocked the entrance to anyone who approached with ill intent toward the owner. The Hearthstone is no longer active, but in its place there is another force. Quellius's curse, enhanced and altered by Khazad-Thul's contribution, has laid a palpable miasma of evil about the entire estate. The land here and everything on it feels dark, heavy, cold, and wrong. Good and neutral creatures find the area uncomfortable and get frequent chills down their spines. Seasoned adventurers might tough it out, but most of other travelers are almost sure to retreat. Evil creatures are not affected, and those who deal in death, such as necromancers, actually seem to rather enjoy this sensation. Inhabitants. Most of the creatures currently within the estate of Unrest are undead. All manner of the dead wander these grounds, ranging from zombies to skeletons to jack-o'-lanterns and ghouls. The weaker and more simple-minded creatures are generally found on the grounds themselves, while more powerful and intelligent undead are usually inside the various structures. There are some living inhabitants, such as death beetles, which feed on death and decay, werebats, evil shape-changers draw to the miasma of the locale, various terrors, which also enjoy the dark, dank atmosphere, lesser blade fiends, sent by Khazak Thul, the Herald of Mischief, who is simply watching events unfold every so often, a will-o-wisp or two, and the few necromancers or death priests, if any, in residence. One very unsettling aspect of the estate is that it is constantly gaining new inhabitants. Not only do those who die here become undead themselves, unless protected by a priest or directly shielded by their deity, but new undead arrive regularly from beyond the corridor. Those not strong enough to resist its pull and not already bound to some other location shamble many miles to the estate. Once here, undead never leave the ground. They may wander as far as the northern end of the corridor near the Cauldron, but they won't go any further. The only nearby undead apparently immune to the estate's influence are the undertow skeletons in Dagnar's Cauldron, which never cross the submerged rocks known as the stepping stones. The estate grounds. Gazing pools. The first thing most travelers notice upon rounding the final corner of the corridor from the Cauldron is gazing pools. These pools are fed by underground streams, and their water remains clear and fresh despite the curse. Of course, their clarity allows people to easily see many bones and other items lying at the bottom. The streams trickle in through narrow channels near the pool's northern ends along the outside edge of each. These channels are no more than a foot square, far too small for most creatures to enter or exit. The gazebo. The gazebo is circular in shape and about 3 feet off the ground. A wooden grate around the base was built to keep animals from crawling underneath, but this is broken through many places. The gazebo is in surprisingly good shape though, considering the climate and the current inhabitants. The wrought iron structure is still strong despite the rust, and the floorboards still solid enough to support people. Most of the tables and benches still remain, and though their cushions have long since crumbled to dust, the frames are intact and can be used without risk. Oftentimes you will find undead residing within the gazebo. The hedge maze. In front of the manor is an enormous maze made entirely of holly hedges. It stands at least 12 feet tall, obviously much higher than it once was, and up to 20 feet high in places. Its inner walls range from 4 feet to 8 feet thick, and in most places, the paths are easily wide enough for 2 people to walk comfortably side by side. Long ago, the priest Eirnosh planted several small holly bushes near his manor, and after his death, the plants were left to grow wild. By the time the Willhavens arrived on the estate, the holly had formed an immense thicket that covered almost the entire west side of the grounds. Willhaven wanted more structure and beauty for the estate, but he also respected the healing properties of holly and the wishes of his predecessor, so he did not have the holly removed. Instead, he had it trimmed carefully and shaped into a large rectangle with paths woven through it. The grass between was once kept short and neat, so the maze was nothing more than a pleasant diversion. People would enter in pairs, racing to reach the center or one particular exit first. The thick bushes also provided a good deal of privacy, and couples would sometimes sneak into the maze to be alone together. After the curse, most of the estate's plants died, but the holly survived. It continued to flourish even with the limited sunlight and cooler temperatures, and with no one around to trim it, the edges grew ragged. The top of the hedges now rise unbelievably high in some places, with dips and rises like mountain peaks. Many of its walls now uneven, and some are slanted or even have protrusions. The passages all still exist, however, even in a few places they can now only accommodate one person at a time. These days the maze is infested with death beetles. These dangerous vermin like to nestle within the hedge walls, scuttling to attack anyone wandering past. They eat virtually any meat, living or dead, so they thrive in this environment. Even with the beetles and the thorns, however, the maze is one of the safer places on the estate. Most of the undead don't enter it, either because they assume no living victim would be foolish enough to attempt it, or because they are too stupid to find entrances. The death beetles are dangerous but can be dealt with, and they help keep the undead population in the maze down. Fortunately, the various skeletons, which are at little risk of attack from the carnivorous beetles, rarely go beyond the first bend or two. The only real dangers in the maze are more powerful ghouls that sometimes decide to hunt here, or the Herald of Mischief. Interestingly, the hedge maze is a substantial part of the reason the Lich Tintragen has been so frustrated over the last few centuries. When the ghost of Garanel realized that he had been blamed for Tintragen's atrocities, he was furious, wishing immediately to strike back at the Lich possessing his body. He wasn't able to reclaim his own form, so he did the next best thing. He stole the Lich's corpse instead, but Garanel needed some place foolproof to hide the body. Soaring about the estate, he hit upon a solution. He ordered several of his minions, for he had dominated many of Tintragen's followers, to collect the Lich's body and place it within a wall of the maze, not far from the center. After that was done, Garanel had the minions destroyed, so that Tintragen could not somehow find out what they had done. Over time, the holly has grown up and around the Lich's body, lifting it well above human eye level. The waterfall. Just beyond the gazebo, along the estate's west wall, is a semicircular basin in the ground. Over the edge of this basin pours a small waterfall. The water then pools in the shallow basin before flowing towards its south end and down a second waterfall into the grotto below. The undead generally avoid this spot, though natural water does not harm them at all. They don't particularly like it either, especially the zombies, who can lose valuable skin in the constant downpour. The grotto. The waterfall's basin dips lower along its south end and actually drops sharply off into the southern edge. Here, the rushing water hides a set of stairs, which curve down below the waterfall that plummets from the basin above into the grotto below. A stout iron rail recessed into the wall provides an anchor point against the current. The basin leads down into a small grotto. The grotto is a quiet place, the water shielding it from other sounds overhead. Moss along the wall glows faintly, providing just enough light for those with low light vision or ultravision to see clearly. The water gathers in the center of the floor before spiraling down a wide hole and out of sight. When the Willhavens arrived, even they could find little to improve upon. They smoothed the basin out slightly and carved the steps into the grotto, but otherwise left the area unchanged. Yet not everyone is as reverent as were the Willhavens. The grotto is currently occupied by the only sapient, non-evil creature on the entire estate, a recently arrived gnomish explorer and spelunker named Vestian Rockworm. Vestian does not care about the estate above, and certainly has no interest in fighting the undead. His passion is for rocks and caves, particularly those that have never been explored. Some years ago, an adventurer who had braved the estate and survived mentioned the waterfall in Vestian's company, and the gnome wondered where all that water might lead. He gathered his gear immediately and traveled all the way to the estate to find out. Once he entered the grotto, the gnome knew he was in for an adventure. Here was a cave that had barely been touched except by nature, and the water slipped away to, well, to who knows? Vestian intends to find out. Slowly, carefully, the gnome has chipped away at the rock around the drain, enlarging it so that he can fit through. He has slipped inside a few times, though he can only fit about 20 to 30 feet down into the place, and already he has discovered a labyrinth of narrow tunnels in the rock below. These could contain precious gems or rare metals or creatures no one has seen before, but all Vestian really cares about is being the first to enter and explore them. Willhaven Manor. This impressive structure has 3 floors, including a rear wing and 2 towers, one at the northwest corner and one at the southwest. The building features tall, elegant columns, several balconies, and carefully chiseled stone blocks. The only exception to this is the northeast corner of the first floor. In this area, the stone is cruder, more roughly chiseled, and pieced together from more irregular chunks. The Willhavens lived in the manor, of course, but the building was more than just a family residence. For one thing, the Willhavens were aristocrats, and the house was designed to reflect their former lifestyle. It included several features, such as its library and ballroom, that seemed out of place for such a rough and dangerous region. Yet the Willhavens were determined to bring not only peace, but culture to the area, and they threw frequent parties for the other locals. It must certainly have been strange to see orcs and goblins dancing amongst elves, dwarves, and men, if indeed the legends of such parties are true, but all written records of formal guests report that everyone did indeed enjoy themselves at these events, and the dances and balls probably did more to further the local peace than any negotiation. The manor also had rooms for servants and the knights tasked with enforcing the peace, plus those clergy who chose to live with and assist Frederick in his work. Further, since many people came to them in need of healing, the house included an infirmary as well. After the family was murdered, the house was ransacked, but the looters were only looking for a few specific items, so very little was actually taken. Since then, the house has been a virtual war zone, with Tintragen and Garanel constantly fighting each other, and the occasional third party for control. The building has weathered the many battles fought since that time surprisingly well. Many of the windows have shattered, and some of the balconies and stairs have weak spots that cannot support a person's weight, but otherwise the building is largely intact. It has acquired a new resident, however. In addition to the undead, several patches of mortuary fungus, normally found in cemeteries and particularly in mausoleums, now coat many of the walls and even the ceilings, and the unwary might easily succumb to its deadly attack. The first floor of the manor. The manor's ground level was once given over to everyday activities. Here the family ate, entertained, studied, or played. It is now filled with undead, primarily zombies and skeletons, though several ghouls occasionally wander through as well. The second floor. Most of the rooms on the second floor are bedrooms. Ghouls frequent this floor more often than the ground floor below. Although skeletons are still common as well, zombies, which tend to have difficulty traversing stairs, are rarely found in the upper levels. Maria's bedroom. Willhaven's eldest child, Maria, had her bedroom next to her father's study. Maria was a happy, friendly young woman, pretty and cheerful and well-liked. In fact, she had just reached marriable age when she was killed, and had many suitors. Her room was painted with flowers, and her bed frame carved to resemble roses. The west wall was covered in windows, but on the east wall stood a pair of bookcases and the door to the hall. Gaston's room. This was once the bedchamber to the Willhaven's only son, Gaston, a serious young man who had just begun training as a paladin of Quellios. His furniture was simple and solid, made of clean wood and no carving. The bookcases and table have been shattered, but the bed and the armoire remain intact. Sarah's room. The Willhaven's youngest child, daughter Sarah, had her bedroom here across the grand stairs from her sister. More serious than her sister and more studious than her brother, Sarah had great potential as a wizard, and had already begun to receive training from her mother. Her furniture was carved with brightly painted animal shapes, as befits a young child, but her bookcases held several basic primers on magic. The third floor. The manor's third floor only had a handful of rooms, most if it was set aside for entertaining, but a small section was also for education. Ghouls and skeletons occupy this floor, as do a few zombies that generally stay on this level. Lady Willhaven's den. This large room was the province of Anna Willhaven, who was a much-loved noblewoman, and also powerful wizard in her own right. This room was her study and laboratory. Anna spent much of her time in this room, researching and testing spells. During the last year of her life, she also brought her youngest child, Sarah, along and begun to tutor the girl in wizardry. The room has not been disturbed at all, because none of the other undead on the estate dare to antagonize its occupant. Today, a reanimated hand has claimed this den, and rarely it ever leaves the room. Some travelers believe the creature may spend its time trying to decipher Anna's notes and spellbooks, but no one can be sure. The hand wears a single piece of jewelry, an ivory bracelet. The basement. The manor rises 3 stories above ground, but also descends 1 floor below. Most of the entrances to this level from inside the manor are either concealed or private. The only other way down is through a root cellar beneath the rear wing. A set of stairs is cut into the ground on the north side of the wing, and these go to the root cellar, which has a concealed door connecting it to the rest of the basement. The Willhavens were careful about access to this level because it held several things they considered valuable or dangerous. The root cellar. This is the only basement room that leads directly outside via a short staircase along the north wall. The room has shelves along its east and west and south walls, which once would have held roots, herbs, and various other food items. All of those have long since turned to mold and thence to dust. However, the room has found a second, less pleasant use. The Lich Tindragon has used this cellar to interrogate and torture travelers in hopes that one of them will reveal the location to the hearthstone. Blood spatters cover every wall, and instead of roots, the shelves hold jagged knives and other torture devices, while a small brazier in one corner is kept smoldering, with pincers and pokers resting amongst the flames. In the northwest corner of the room is a stack of wine casks, but these are actually false. They hide and conceal a door into the rest of the basement, which is accessible by turning the spout on the top of the left cask. Now, werebats often hang from the overhead beams, waiting for nightfall to make their way up to the manor and out into the open sky to hunt. Festering hags occasionally wander through, also on their way out to search for victims. The werebats long ago learned to leave these desiccated crones alone. The pit. Filling the northwest corner of the storage room is a large pool of lava, bubbling and throwing off a great deal of heat. This is actually an illusion, created long ago by an ally of Lord Willhaven to keep others away from the Black Vault. In any case, the pit, perfectly concealed by the illusion, hides a very real danger now. Unlike in Willhaven's time, it is now home to several festering hags, the most powerful of which is actually the former Lady Anna Willhaven herself, who is tragically transformed into this undead creature upon her death. The underside of the walkway is also home to mortuary fungus, which has learned from painful experience not to bother the undead inhabitants of the place. The Family Vault. This room was built with thick walls and a stout door to protect the Willhaven family's valuables. Unfortunately, both the Lich Tindragon and the Ghost of Garanel believe the Hearthstone of Gentle Dissuasion must be in this room or nearby, so they can frequently be found here fighting one another for the opportunity to search the vault again. That is going to wrap up the story of the Estate of Unrest. This felt like a fitting dungeon to do with Halloween right around the corner. I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you in the next video.